see when we're streaming. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I call to order this special meeting of council for Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. First item of business, as per usual, is land acknowledgement. I just want to share a couple things before doing so. I had the opportunity, as the CAO and myself have been inclined to do over the last 4 or 5 years, is we try to get together regularly with the Stoney Chiefs and their CAOs individually, and we had the opportunity to meet up with Chief Young on Friday for lunch, and you know, it strikes me when Chief Young talks about you know, the traditional ways and how they've had to adapt for today. The traditional ways included moving around within this area and adjacent, following the buffalo. And once you get a buffalo, you bring it back to feed the community, and you use every part of the buffalo. And now, as you'll hear Chief Young say, the modern buffalo is economic development. Now you have to work within this system to earn funds that will come back, be brought back to the community to feed the people. So that's one thing that I just was striking to me. And then I was listening, I was driving back from Edmonton. I had a bunch of meetings with ministers at the legislature yesterday. And driving back, and I heard of this one land acknowledgement that was referenced, and I'm going to actually borrow it today. So I want to set a context first for this land acknowledgement. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the signatories to Treaty 7. And in particular, I'm talking about the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations. I'm also talking about the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, who are our most adjacent Indigenous neighbors, and they're comprised of the Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki First Nations. So that's who I'm talking about. Where am I talking about? I'm talking about these lands in which we reside right now, and it's Chuwap, Chipchia, and Kadabi is the Stoney name for this place. And what's the context in which I'm providing this land acknowledgement? Well, I'm talking about the traditional and historic lands of the First Nations that I talked about. And I would add to that, and I almost missed it, is the Métis government, the Otipemisiwak, who are within the Rocky View Métis District Forest. So they're also part of the Hue. So I'm talking about the traditional and historic lands of these Indigenous peoples that I've named. And so here's the land acknowledgement. It's theirs. Moving on to the agenda. Looking for the agenda May 12th. Are there any changes? Seeing none, I will move approval of the agenda for the May 12th, 2026 special meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now looking to the minutes of April 21st, 2026. Are there any errors or omissions that any member of council has noticed? Seeing none, I move approval of the minutes of April 21st, 2026 special meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now we'll move on to our new business, starting with H1, which is the Property Tax Task Force Report. Shall I just call upon Mr. Brunin? Mr. Ben Brunin will be presenting this report. He was the facilitator that worked with the Property Tax Task Force to come up with these recommendations. Mr. Brunin, welcome to council. And whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you here today. Are you comfortable if I share my screen? Is that the best way to approach the presentation?
Sure, that works well.
Okay. So in your meeting package is the presentation. It seems a bit daunting, I suspect, because it's 70 slides, but the actual report that I'll present to you today is only 14. Most of that is appendix. And so you see in the meeting package is the proposed property tax policy, as well as this report and the previous property tax policy that has the red line amendments in it for completeness of reference. And I'll walk through the essence of the proposed policy and provide some context to the content from the perspective of the participants of the Property Tax Task Force. And so this slide talks about the mandate of the task force. You have that in the summary note that was shared with you. And so this was really what guided the group of representatives, including the business community, the tourism sector, council, and members of the public, including a representative that was a non-permanent resident. And the group explored the previous work of the Property Tax Task Force, explored the authorities of and requirements for property tax policy for the town, and did some review of developments that have occurred in the town through assessment and taxation trends over time since the last Property Tax Task Force, which was from 2012 to 2013. And then the group provided some guidance with respect to updating the policy and the metrics and targets that it is recommending be included in the new policy, and also explored alternatives in a discussion of the Livability tax program. And you'll see some recommendations summarized at the end of this presentation with respect to that program. The group was very committed. They participated in 5 half-day meetings over December to April, and a very engaged discussion with all of the members, reviewing the content beforehand and coming prepared to make a contribution from a tax policy perspective to the town, my perspective. This slide provides a summary of the type of content that the group has reviewed. In addition to what I shared with you in the previous slide, perhaps notable, the group did request and explored the guidance from the 2013 Property Tax Task Force. In addition, they did explore and consider comparisons and criteria for comparing to other municipalities. And then you'll see here is a bit of a summary of the discussion topics that the group reviewed throughout the series of meetings. So as you can appreciate, there was some in-depth review and the ability to explore to a level of detail that provided comfort, I think, for the Property Tax Task Force members to really understand the issues and provide some guidance in terms of how they wanted to look at the issues, whether it be through different ways to consider changes in assessment, whether they be on the average for various types of properties and classes of properties, or how they would like to see comparable criteria applied to other municipalities. So it was iterative and relatively comprehensive, and I think a very robust exploration of the issues. And so now I'll go through the proposed policy that the Property Tax Task Force unanimously recommended that proceed to council for approval. And I won't obviously read this verbatim, but I will give you some guidance and some context as to the rationale as to why some of this language is proposed. And so you'll see here the policy description and the principles that the Property Tax Task Force endorsed. The first principle is accountability and clarity in the collection of property taxes. And this principle speaks beginning with the role of property tax collection for the province versus the municipality. And the previous policy, the current policy that's in place, does emphasize the importance of focusing on the municipal component when setting municipal property tax policy and ensuring there's appropriate accountability for the collection of property taxes depending on who's collecting it. So whether it be the province or the municipality. And this task force affirmed those concepts and wanted to continue to retain them in this new policy so that the town continues to apply that practice. So when they do set, they're recommending that when council does make property tax policy, it does so on the basis of what's important for the municipality versus what the province is doing, as well as ensuring that there is accountability for those that are paying the taxes so they understand who is collecting how much and who is the appropriate entity that they should address their concerns or questions to, whether it be the province or the municipality. The third element on this screen relates to the collection of the livability tax revenues. And this section remains largely unamended, but it's an important clarification that the Property Tax Task Force wanted to ensure it's clear that livability tax program revenues are excluded from the tax policy and assessment targets and metrics set in this policy, and view that livability tax program component is separate and in addition to council's approach. And in this instance, this property tax policy would not apply to the livability tax revenues collected. But in addition, one other point that's quite important from the members was to ensure that the livability tax revenues are subject to the livability revenue purpose as set out in the town's reserves policy. And this is largely driven by ensuring that there is clarity and accountability with respect to the use of funds for the livability tax revenues, for the purposes of ensuring that this policy is accurate and complete. The second principle endorsed by the Property Tax Task Force is accountability in engaging stakeholders in tax policy decisions. And this principle did exist in the previous or current policy and is being affirmed by the group. And the policy description is council tax policy education session will be held annually during the tax rate bylaw presentation to council. And this is an update to the previous wording, largely because this previously had framed the education session held more closer to the orientation of new council. And the group had a discussion about how best to approach this. And while an education session is required to support orientation of new council, it is not specific to tax policy. And the group also concluded that the education session from a tax policy perspective is probably best held during tax rate bylaw discussions, because that's when this issue is the most relevant. And so the task force proposed policy statement is to ensure that education session occurs more closely to the tax rate bylaw presentation. And then there, from an accountability and engagement perspective, the task force discussed the frequency with which the council, it thinks council should convene property tax task forces. And the ultimate recommendation of the group was that council could consider whether to convene a property tax task force every term, but not necessarily convene them, but consider it. But that a property tax task force be convened at least once every 10 years. And the intent is largely to ensure that council makes the conscious decision as to whether a new task force should be convened, but also creating that a minimum once every 10 years it is convened to ensure that there is currency with respect to the tax policy and the engagement of the stakeholders in the process. The group also is recommending that the policy be reviewed once every term of council. It also as an accountability tool to ensure that this remains relevant for every council, regardless of whether that they convene a property tax task force. The next principle that the property tax task force proposed is stability in managing taxes. And this relates to the importance of ensuring there aren't any significant fluctuations in tax burden, regardless of whom the taxpayer is, whether it be non-residential, tourist home, or residential. And the guidance here is largely unchanged from the current policy, clarifying that when establishing an annual tax rate, consideration is given to the previous year's burden to ensure consistent and equitable distribution between classes. The next principle that the task force is endorsing is equity and competitiveness in the distribution of the residential and non-residential tax share. And this principle provides, and here is where there is a fair amount of what I would say guidance from tax targets, as well as some of the metrics the group is supportive of. So the property tax task force endorses setting a target of a tax share policy split of 55% residential, excluding tourist homes, and 45% non-residential, including tourist homes. That's it's a succinct statement, but there's a fair amount of thought and deliberation that went into that statement. The tax share approach was an approach that was endorsed by the previous property tax task force in 2013, and the direction at that time was to allocate a tax share of 1/3 residential, which included tourist homes, and 2/3 non-residential.
Excuse me, Ben, or Mr. Brunin. I just think that that's flipped. I think it should be 2/3 was residential, 1/3 non-residential.
Yes, I think you're right.
Right.
Sorry, apologies.
Because the residential had about 85% of the assessed value, but only paid 2/3, and the non-residential had about 15% and paid 1/3. So I think it should just be flipped, correct?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah,
I've plant errors on purpose to test people, so appreciate that.
Very successfully done. Thank you.
Yeah. And to elaborate on this, there is actually a fair amount to unpack here. The first is that target, the 1/3, 2/3, the 1/3 non-residential, 2/3 residential, while it was endorsed by the property tax task force, and I think implicitly endorsed by council, it actually wasn't included in the policy. The current policy doesn't have that reference. And so this property tax task force did recommend that a specific target be included. And the other thing that this property tax task force explored was the treatment of tourist homes. Tourist homes are, by definition, have to be assessed as residential. But in practice, the task force is of the mind that they should be treated as commercial. They're essentially businesses. There's a business license that is required to operate a tourist home. The current policy of council is to charge tourist homes the commercial rate, and they compete in the market with other forms of short-term accommodation. And because of this, the task force is recommending that tourist homes be considered equivalent or incorporated into the non-residential base for the purposes of setting tax rates and targets. So while prior policy was to retain tourist homes in the residential component, the proposed policy is to consider them in the non-residential. Effectively, from a tax share perspective, the task force views this change as neutral from a distribution of the tax burden. It's really more a matter of how it's measured and reported. And that's why they're recommending a 55% residential tax share, excluding tourist homes, and 45% non-residential tax share, including tourist homes. And if you were to scroll through to some of the appendix slides, you would see the comparisons of how how the various assessment and tax shares can be distributed, indicating that this policy is really more one of presentation as opposed to distribution of tax burden. Okay, so moving on to the next point. The task force is also concerned about ensuring the relevance and currency of the policy. And there was a healthy discussion at the table about as the assessment shares materially change over time, the targeted tax shares will change proportionately. And the task force did explore historical changes to the assessment and tax distribution of the community, particularly residential, non-residential, and tourist homes, as well as they did explore some forecasting material that had been prepared for the town, and indicating the extent to which those shares would change over time. And the conclusion was generally Canmore's distribution of assessment is pretty stable and not anticipated to shift significantly in the foreseeable future. But it's always hard to predict the future, and everybody is wrong. And that's why it's important to have this language included in the policy to provide some guidance to council for consideration of the shift in residential and non-residential assessment shares and tax shares going forward. So continued on the equity and competitiveness in the distribution of the residential and non-residential tax share. The property tax task force explored issues with respect to indicators for how to measure tax burden and distribution, as did the previous property tax task force in 2012, 2013. And the task force concluded there is no one indicator that really is the ideal indicator, but rather there are a number of indicators that tend to be helpful for measuring the distribution and burden of tax burden equitably, across the distribution of the subclasses in the assessment base. But they are recommending some specific indicators be tracked, and they're also recommending that they be monitored to help benchmark and inform changes, not as binding recommendations. So they're recommending that these be the indicators that are tracked to help inform decision-making and present changes over time, to help inform council or updates to this policy in the future. But the key indicators the group is supportive of are first non-residential to residential tax rate ratios, because they provide a useful relative benchmark of tax rates. Residential tax rates per dwelling. And this is notable because the current policy explicitly tracks residential taxes per capita. But because 25% of dwellings in Canmore are occupied by non-usual residents, taxes per dwelling are the more accurate indicator for burden on the non-residential base in Canmore. And so the task force is recommending the indicator of residential taxes per dwelling. They're recommending tax shares as an indicator, particularly relative to assessment shares, and hence why they even made the recommendation of the tax share target. When you look at the indicators for tax changes over time, it's always helpful to pay attention to changes in the assessment base, but it's also quite difficult to do targets that incorporate both of them. And so the Property Tax Task Force was comfortable targeting a tax share, but also providing guidance that monitoring changes in assessment share relative to the tax share is quite important, which is that last indicator, tax share to assessment share proportion, which gives an indicator of how relative to the contribution of the assessment base, the tax share changes over time. And then finally on this slide, comparable municipalities. So this is a clarification, and what you'll probably see when you read the existing policy versus the proposed policy is the task force wanted to make sure it was clear on how it approaches the issue of comparable municipalities and how to use comparisons with other municipalities. And so the task force did spend a fair amount of time exploring other municipalities and exploring the metrics and how they compare. And their conclusion was comparable municipalities, and the language is deliberate, may include neighbors within the region, Alberta municipalities with similar assessment and or population sizes, and other tourism-based communities in Alberta and British Columbia. And the reason for that is they also were reticent to make a strong recommendation of should compare or who specifically the town should be compared to. Rather, it's for guidance. And the group, when they did explore this issue, what's the purpose of the comparison? The purpose of the comparison is to compare Canmore's relative tax position for the purposes of communicating to residents, communicating to businesses, communicating to the province, and benchmarking comparably, how Canmore is positioned relative to others. And then when we think of the criteria, comparing Canmore, the group was pretty clear. Urban municipalities are the comparator. Rural municipalities simply did not show comparisons that made a lot of sense. So the group was clear that urban municipalities of similar population size is an important metric because it shows how Canmore tracks relative to this comparable size for service demanded on the residential base. They were also supportive of exploring comparable urban municipalities of similar assessment base value because Canmore does have a higher relative assessment base on the residential side relative to other municipalities, and showing or depicting Canmore on the size of the assessment base is also can be an instructive exercise, particularly if the audience is the province and trying to convey relative comparison or material impact of the community. And then finally, the group endorsed other tourism-based communities in Alberta and British Columbia. And the group there is a list of other tourism-based communities compared in the appendix. That list was a list that the task force was comfortable comparing to, and it included a number of BC municipalities. Some were sort of mountain-based, some were non-mountain tourist communities such as Tofino and Ucluelet. There were some Alberta municipalities, Banff and Jasper, in there. But the list is really one to provide some guidance of how Canmore really does compare to other markets that seem similar. Even though every municipality is unique, they were comfortable that was a useful comparison group. we're almost done. So equity for vacant residential properties. And so the policy description is the same tax rate will be applied to the residential vacant service land subclass, the residential vacant unserviced land subclass, and the primary residential subclass. And the property tax task force discussed whether there was merit or whether it made sense to charge a differential tax rate for vacant service or unserviced land. But the group ultimately agreed that it didn't make sense to charge a differential rate. And in particular, the rate was whether the livability tax should apply to it. But the group didn't think it made sense to charge the higher rate, as this is a very small segment of properties, but also has a number of influences on it. And it didn't necessarily, in the view of the property tax task force, justify charging the higher rate. There was a discussion, and I did put this in here, in the event that there is interest in exploring this further, the task force noted that council could ask administration to bring forward information on the vacant serviced or unserviced land subclasses to further understand, the characteristics of these properties, the size, the value, and whether and to what extent it's worth pursuing. So, I'll just sort of leave the point there and leave it for whether council wants to pick that up. But I did want to sort of reference that point because it was discussed at the table. And then equity for tourist homes and visitor accommodation units. I spoke to this briefly earlier. The property tax task force did conclude that the current policy to charge tourist homes, the tourist home subclass, the equivalent of the non-residential tax rate, is affirmed by this property tax task force. They recognize that, and the policy description is largely consistent, which was already in the policy. They recognize that it be taxed equivalent to that of non-residential properties, and recognition that it can be used as a non-residential visitor accommodation unit and rented out for short term. Equity from a user pay perspective. This was a discussion point, but some of the task force members were quite interested in. A little bit because they felt that it was important to add accuracy and flexibility from a user pay perspective, recognizing from a property tax policy perspective, anytime the town can identify users and feel that it can fairly charge users for the service, that's an outcome that would be economically efficient and can be easy to support. But there is nuance and there's reasons why user fees aren't fully charged to certain segments. And there was a healthy discussion in the group about that issue. The task force agreed it's important to track various social and economic indicators in the community to understand if there are implications from its tax policy and user fee policy. Indicators generally are population change, significant swings in population or changes in population growth can have a significant effect on municipal service demand, or conversely, a decline in population can also have a significant impact on the community. Business counts, types of business, changes in the cost of living, income levels and distribution, building permits, and economic growth. These are all indicators that are helpful to track. Not any one indicator per se is going to provide, significant guidance for changes to property tax policy. But in aggregate, these indicators are useful for the town to track over time in terms of the health of the community, overall, socioeconomic health of the community. And then when it came specifically to cost recovery on user fees, the task force wanted to ensure the statement in the policy is current, up to date, and something that the town can rely upon. Where in the past it said where possible, the property tax task force is proposing where practical, cost recovery from user fees and charges will be considered to replace property tax revenue. And this is written purposefully to have some discretion and sort of thoughtfulness in terms of the allocation and use of user fees, and also as a consideration. But they wanted that the task force was pretty keen to ensure that this statement was accurate and a useful statement for council. And then finally, this property tax policy will guide council when setting the annual property tax rates. Administration will provide council with tax and assessment indicator data pursuant to this policy at the time the property tax rates are being set each year. Largely accountability statements to, I'd say, logically execute this proposed policy for completeness and ease of finalization. So that summarizes the responsibilities and I guess concludes the recommendations that they brought forward, the task force endorsed for council consideration. And then in addition to the property tax policy, the property tax task force did explore dynamics and issues with respect to the livability tax program. And what I've got here is one slide summarizing those deliberations. So the property tax task force did discuss various approaches to design options for the program. So every member recognized the importance of addressing housing affordability and accessibility in the town, and that was not up for debate. That was taken as a given that there is a significant housing affordability challenge, and recognize the legitimate role that the town has in addressing it. But the focus really was on options for raising and stewarding the revenues in the livability tax program budget, which I understand you'll be deciding on after this. So the summary of the recommendations that were approved by the property tax task force, and these were voted on, and some were unanimous, not all of them were, but these are the ones that were ultimately approved. The first is for the property tax task force recommended council that 100% of the administrative costs for the livability tax program be paid by general taxes. And the guidance here, the rationale here is the concept of the livability tax is intended to fund livability programs. And the task force ultimately approved the notion that all of the administrative costs should be borne by the tax base as a whole. And so the administrative costs would not be included as part of the livability revenues, which then enables more livability revenues collected, or the full amount of the livability tax revenues to be funding the actual programs. The second recommendation is that the livability tax rates be set no higher than tourist home tax rates. And so this point was raised in recognition of, if you would say, equity in terms of the distribution of the base. And the rationale here is, why would a second home owner be charged or a non-permanent resident be charged more than the tourist homes? The tourist homes are businesses, and they're recognized as effectively being businesses. Conceptually, from a fairness and equity perspective, the task force did not think that the livability tax rate should be higher for these non-permanent resident, non-primary residents that would be subject to livability tax. Thirdly, the task force recommended that the livability tax rates,
Yeah, there's just a duplication there.
I do have it twice. I've read this before I presented. I thought, is that there twice? And then I thought it wasn't, but it is. That's a point of emphasis. Mary, you might recall. Sorry, let me do this last one, and then I suspect I'm probably missing one of the points.
No, there were three, so it was just a duplication there.
Okay, point of emphasis. That the task force recommend council consider raising the CCH requisition increase proposed in the livability tax program through the vital homes levy, and that the distribution of vital homes levy be 30% residential and 70% non-residential. And the rationale here is the property tax task force reviewed the livability tax program budget and saw that there was some revenues raised for vital homes. And the recommendation was, the CCH requisition, and the recommendation was to collect that requisition through the existing vital homes levy, so that is also an item that is no longer a line item on the livability tax budget, leaving that budget to fund more things, in recognition that given that the current CCH requisition applies to the entire base, the task force, I think, saw the value in continuing with that principle and approach, but also redistributing that cost. And so the current vital homes levy, as I understand it, is a 50-50 levy between the residential and the non-residential. And the task force made the recommendation that this distribution change to 30% residential, 70% non-residential, I think is the reflection of the distribution of the texture loosely that currently applies, as well as in recognition that the intent is to avoid eroding affordability of the residential base through higher taxes. So I think that sort of covers the intent of that recommendation. So that concludes my presentation today. I'll stop sharing my screen and open up turn it back to you, I guess, Mr. Chair, and provide guidance on how you'd like to approach the discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Brunin, for your work and for this presentation. So there are a couple things I'd like to confirm before opening it up to questions. One, when we're talking about a proposed tax split within this policy of 55% for residential, not including tourist homes, and 45% non-residential, including tourist homes, that's essentially maintaining the status quo. Is that correct?
I would say so.
Within like a percentage point, yeah.
It is within a percentage point. That's correct. I think technically it's a 1 percentage point variance, but the property tax task force largely viewed that as a status quo distribution.
Right. Okay. The second thing I'd like to confirm, and I mean, you can speak to this, but I think this is just something that everybody has to keep in mind, that we will, of course, whatever policy is approved, and presumably it's this one, will be interpreted in alignment with Bill 28 upon Bill 28 being given royal assent, because we have to be aligned with provincial law.
And I would say yes. I assume you're speaking to me, Mr. Mayor, but that is correct. So there was a caveat through the discussion where the livability tax program references are in the policy that the livability tax program would be compliant with Bill 28.
Yeah.
Bill 28 was discussed here and there during the task force deliberations, recognizing by the group that it created some uncertainty, but also recognized for the group that once it was finalized, that the livability tax program would be compliant with the provisions contained in Bill 28 going forward.
Great.
And that this policy would be reviewed with a lens to ensure its accuracy.
Great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to have those two things confirmed, because when people read this, they need to know that it is essentially a status quo with some great refinements to the wording, and also a dive into the comparables, and that anything that's here will be interpreted in line with Bill 28 So essentially, the livability tax program, higher rates will not apply to Albertan second homeowners. Okay, great. So I'll open it up to see if there are any questions. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Brunin, for your very detailed presentation. My question is actually around amendments to the policy itself rather than the task force report. Is this the appropriate time to be asking those questions?
Yeah, so the policy there was two basic broad categories of things recommended by the task force. One was the policy.
Okay.
And secondly was livability tax program recommendations, of which there were 3. So yes, it
Sounds good.
Perfectly fair.
Yeah, I guess my question is around Section 6 and some of the rewrites there. So this one, Section 6.2, Council will target a tax share policy split of 55% residential, not including tourist homes, and 45% non-residential, including tourist homes. The previous policy didn't actually have like a hard number written into it. I mean, obviously this one has the same kind of flexibility to look at indicators. I'm just wondering the reason behind actually writing in a number into the policy.
The discussion at the task force, one of the starting points was when the task force was discussing the 2012-2013 task force, there was a discussion amongst some of the participants that were there. I think you were there, Mr. Mayor, and you made the statement in the room, the existing policy was a 1/3, 2/3 tax share target. And that was the understanding. And that was the recommendation of the task force report at the time. But the actual policy itself was silent on the target. And I'm not entirely sure why it was silent on the target. I think the group thought that was perhaps an oversight, but I can't recall. I wasn't part of those deliberations. And because of that history and the expectation that the existing policy already had a target in it, the group was quite comfortable affirming a target and including a target, recognizing that it was largely a similar target to what was introduced or what was recommended in the last property tax task force.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Councillor Ma?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Bruner, for your time in presenting. Could you speak a little bit more? There's this one component of report I found pretty sobering. It was called the Gini Index, and maybe just for the public to understand, what is the Gini Index and what were the findings that were brought about?
I'll turn that question over to Sally. There are sections in the report that were presented and built by Sally. The entire livability tax program slides were actually slides that were prepared by the town of Canmore. So, Sally, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Brunin and Councillor Ma. That slide is part of what was presented to the task force around the livability tax program, just as background context. So the Gini Index is part of I believe it's the federal census that looks at wealth and equity and from the lowest income to the highest income in a community. And Canmore has the highest disparity or gap in all of Canada at the last reporting of the Gini Index. So it was just one piece of multiple data points when the livability tax went to the property tax task force.
Oh, okay, so when I'm looking at the report here, that's super helpful. It says that it's actually 2 consecutive federal censuses that we've had the highest disparity in Canada?
That's right.
Okay, that's a dubious distinction. Thank you.
And just so everybody knows, the Gini Index, it was referenced in the census. It's not our number. It comes from Stats Can, and it would reference Canmore as having the highest in the country in both 2016 and 2021 census. We'll see if it's referenced in this upcoming census. The Gini Index, as CAO Cottle mentioned, speaks to disparity or inequality of incomes within a community. Just so everybody knows, 0 means everything is shared perfectly between all people, and 1 means essentially a single person or a very, very minute group own everything and everybody has nothing else. So all numbers are typically in between 0 and 1. And that number is often found to be the highest in a large municipality because you have a lot of people. But here we do have quite a range here in Canmore, and so we have that dubious distinction.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? I do not see any, so thank you very much, Mr. Brunin.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to work with you.
Yep, please feel free to stick around online if you'd like to hear our debate. And you don't need to keep your camera on any longer unless we come back to you. But questions are done for now, and I'm going to be putting some motions on the table. Okay.
Thank you.
Before putting the motion on the table to accept the report, I just need to seek some clarification, and I'm going to seek it from Dr. Cottle and or Ms. Jones. There was a couple of items that we found in the published agenda package were just typos. One was on page 8, and that was the flipping of the 2/3 and the 1/3. And the other one was on page 13, and there was a duplication of 2 bullet points. I'm wondering, should we be bringing forward an amending motion to correct those, or are those seen as editorial and will be corrected in the final version?
Ms. Jones and I agree that those are just editorial errors, and we can correct them.
Great, thank you. That's what I was hoping would be the answer. So just we'll look for those to be amended in the final agenda package that is published. So we'll first then turn to the task report, property tax task force report as presented, and then we're going to be dealing with the tax policy. I am going to be moving an amendment with respect to the policy, just a title for the section above section 7. I believe it's miraculously described another way, but I'm wondering, do I need to bring that up as an amendment for both of these or just under the policy? Because the report does include the policy. And it just occurred to me, which is why you have not received notice of this before.
It's okay, thank you. I think that you can accept the task force report as is. The change, the policy then, and approving the policy now is council's to decide what to do with. So
Okay.
the change that you want to make would be on the policy
Okay,
as a go forward.
perfect.
I think that's
Because the other one's
sufficient.
just for plan purposes.
That's
It
right.
really is the actual approval of what's contained besides the policy is when it comes to us like in budget time or setting mill rates or that sort of thing.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so then I will first move that council approve the property tax task force report as presented for planning purposes. In speaking in support of this motion, I would like to express gratitude for all those that participated in the process, in particular the public members who gave of their time quite generously to provide their perspectives and input every step of the way. I believe that this report contains excellent information, and we have taken what was, which was good, and made it better. So I would encourage people's support to accept this report for planning purposes. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham?
Thank you, Your Worship. I too would like to express my gratitude to the entire committee and Mr. Brunin for the work we did. Extensive meetings, well debated. We covered a lot of ground over that time. There were definitely some dissenting opinions on some of the decisions, and I appreciate those. And I just want to thank everybody for the work that they've done there.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm going to go to Councillor Marin as you are also on the task force.
Thank you, Mayor Crowsert. Yes, I just wanted to basically just say the same, the gratitude for the work that was put into it. I think this report reflects a broad perspective from the community, and I really appreciate that there was representatives from a wide variety of our community members. So that has made this report stronger, and I support the motion to accept it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mayor Crowsert, and thank you to Mr. Brunin and the other members of the Property Tax Task Force for all their work. I'm speaking in favor of approving the Property Tax Task Force report as presented for planning purposes. I find it really a valuable exercise and review of not just principles, but the framework that we have in place as a municipality that has been worked on by leaders in our community starting with the first report in 2013. I'm really appreciative of the changes proposed. I think they only strengthen the work that we do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. I'm also happy to support this. And again, just thanks to the committee and for all the work that they put into come up with this report and for the changes that have been proposed to the tax policy. And a lot of effort has gone into this. So thank everyone for taking the time.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion before I call the vote? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. So I'm now going to move that, bring it up here again. Move the council approve the property tax policy as presented with implementation beginning in the 2027 taxation year. Before speaking to the motion, I would like to propose a very simple edit, so an amendment. So I'd ask that people turn to page 91 of the agenda package, which is one of the pages of the clean version of the proposed policy. You'll see above section 7, the title is Equity for Vacant Residential Properties. My concern is that will be misinterpreted or create confusion around the livability tax program, when in fact what is being referred to are vacant residential lands. And so these are undeveloped lands. These are lands that are either serviced or unserviced vacant lands. And so my proposed amendment would be to amend the title above section 7 to change, and in quotation, properties, end quotation, to quotation, lands, end quotation. So that title would then be Equity for Vacant Residential Lands. I think it's a little bit more clear. It's a simple change. And I'm just looking, I'm seeing nodding heads as you understood. Councillor Marin, I described that verbally. Do you understand what the motion is?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe, and I'll look to the clerk to see if you've captured the question, and I'd be happy to repeat it. Sorry, can you just repeat the motion there? Sure. So the motion is to amend the title above section 7 to change quotation properties, end quotation, to quotation lands, end quotation, period. Great. Thank you for your patience there. I apologize for bringing a motion verbally, but it just occurred to me as Mr. Brunin was presenting it, and I thought I'd bring it forward. So there is a motion on the table, an amending motion. I think I've already spoken to it. Would anybody else like to speak to it? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Councillor Faubert.
I also wanted to make sure that there's a typo in 6.4. I wanted to point out, it says changed, and it should be changes. inform changes to the property tax policy.
Good
But
catch.
that is just a typo, and
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
a
think we
typo, and
need
I think
a,
it can be corrected with those other two
Yeah.
that I raised. Thank you for bringing that up, and good catch. Okay, all right, so now we're back to our main motion, which is with respect to the property tax policy. So now it's going to read that council approve the property tax policy as amended, because of that one change around the title above section 7. So as amended, with implementation beginning in the 2027 taxation year. In speaking to this motion, I support this motion. Of course, we are right at the time where mill rates are to be set, and it's essentially a status quo. However, there has been so much work that is being put in by administration over the last 6 months since budget review to ask that they go back and rework all of that to reflect very, very small changes in the policy itself, I think would be inappropriate, if not cruel. And so I certainly support that this would be for the 2027 taxation year, and we'll just continue to set the mill rates according to the policy as it was, which has essentially been what is being proposed. So I don't see it changing much. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. More of a clarification question. Again, that's around point 6.2. So if we're approving this policy, are we approving a 55-45 tax split for the 2027 year, or will that still go through a review at Finance Committee and Council when we set those
Well,
rates?
the policy is, so if we approve this today,
Yeah.
this policy would be applied for the 2027 tax year, so not this June tax notices, but next June tax notices. It's always open to council to review and amend the policy.
Okay.
So if there in fact is a desire to change that, that could be dealt with before then. It would probably should be brought up sometime early after approving the budget next year. And we can talk about how that could happen if you're interested in doing so. But does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Then I'm prepared to approve this policy or vote in favor of this policy. And I'm going to be very curious about how that clause ages the next time we amend this policy.
Sure. Just to give some background, as Mr. Brunin spoke to, this is essentially the split that has been in place for a number of years now. And the actual split of assessed values hasn't changed much since 2012. And so this split is what's proposed, but there are provisions of the policy that also say if there are big changes to the assessed value, then there should be, that should be considered, as well as other things. So it's like a guidance, but it can always be changed based on circumstances, or of course a change to the policy explicitly. Okay? Anyone else wishing to speak to the tax policy motion? Councillor Ma?
Thank you, Your Worship. And yeah, I'm prepared to vote in support. I think Councilor Murray brought up a great point here. Like, a lot of this stuff is a snapshot in time. And as we work our way through the challenging budget years coming forth, you know, if something does not age well in his parlance, if we need to tweak it a bit, we can revisit as a council. And that I draw comfort from that as well. So thanks for bringing that point up.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? All right, so the motion that is before us is to the council approve the property tax policy as amended with implementation beginning in the 2027 taxation year. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call a break until, well, I'm going to call a break till 2015. or 2015, 2:15. Yeah, we'll see you in 6 hours. No, until 2:15, and we'll resume at that time. Thank you. to the clerk to advise when we're streaming again. Okay, we're back. The first thing we're going to deal with is a motion arising as a result of the property tax motions that were just approved. And I'm going to turn things over to Councillor Hillstead for the motion he'd like to bring.
Thank you. So for my motion, it is that council direct administration to report back to council with tax rate options for tourist homes applicable to the 2027 taxation year, including a comparative analysis, relevant policy considerations, and potential financial impacts. The reason I'm bringing this forward is just
Before you speak to it, let's just, we'll take a breath for a moment and have it come up on the screen, because I know you provided it in advance. Thanks, Ms. Jones, for doing that. It takes a moment, likes to think about it. There we go. Okay, so there's the motion that you just provided. Everybody can take a moment to take a look at that. Okay, please speak to your motion.
So yes, with this motion, my intent is just to get some information back just to see if what the current rate that we charge for tourist homes with the mill rate being just out of the commercial rate, if it's still appropriate, if it should change or, or just stay the same. It's really just to look at comparables and things, because with tourist homes, as they are technically residential, they're not like a hotel where hotels, they don't get sold very often, so hotels have an income-based assessment. And so just to basically more see if they're actually comparable, since they are essentially the same thing where they're providing accommodations for tourism. So this is just to look to see if we're at the right spot, and just for some options for council to look at in the coming year.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll speak in support of the motion. I can advise that when the Property Tax Task Force was deliberating, we didn't dive into the appropriateness of the level of tourist homes other than to tie them to the non-residential rate, which is the status quo. And so to have this information would be helpful, particularly since the recommendation of the task force was to have the livability tax rates no higher than tourist homes. So it'd be interesting information to see if that would bring about any subsequent changes. Also speaking to the motion, Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question, actually. Given that the policy currently ties tourist home tax rates to non-residential, would we actually be able to look at this without putting it in front of another property tax task force for a more comprehensive understanding of what is being asked here?
It's an excellent question. I believe it's always council's purview to do tax policy. The property tax task force is certainly one of the tools that we have used twice now to help inform us of overall policy reviews. My understanding is that Councillor Hillstad's looking for information that then could either inform council to make a tweak to a tax policy, or maybe it will trigger another task force or something. I don't see any change, and we're not approving a change to any of our policies with this. We're simply requesting information in order to assess, is what I take it. Councillor Hillstad, do you see things differently?
Again, I think that's part of the motion with the relevant policy considerations. I would expect that to be brought back to us for what, if we can, or if we, like you said, to bring back a task force, or if it's something that we can amend, or if it even will end up needing to be amended. It might just be confirming that where we're at is where we're at, so.
I would like to propose an amendment
Okay.
as a result, and add and non-residential properties after tourist homes.
Okay, so there's an amending motion on the table from Councillor Faubert. After tourist homes, inserting quotation and non-residential properties, end quotation.
And I'll just wait for Briar to catch, I mean, Madam Clerk. Yeah,
Properties, end quotation.
yeah,
Yeah, after tourist
tourist
homes.
homes. For me, these things are connected, and I'd like to see that perspective that Councillor Hillstad is asking for on tourist homes come back for both classifications, and I use non-residential properties because that's what we use through in the MGA. And I just think that by adding this, it means that context and that relationship, and then the potential for changes in how that relates in both categories is just more clear. And I feel that maybe we'd be getting closer to some of the discussion that would result from that kind of information. Thank you.
Okay. So there's an amending motion on the table. Councillor Hillstad, since it's to your motion, did you want to speak to this first?
I'm gonna digest a little bit first
Okay.
and then come back to me.
Okay, Councillor Ma, did you want to speak to the amending motion or the main one?
I was hoping to speak to the main motion, please.
Okay, and Councillor Murray, same question.
Maybe I'll just ask a question, Councilor Faubert, if
Okay, go
possible.
ahead.
So by non-residential properties, you're talking like commercial and a much more broad review than what Councillor Hillstad was putting forward, is that correct?
Well, because tourist homes are a funny category. They are assessed, they are residential, but taxed commercially. Our policy contains language that ties tourist home to non-residential. And so if we're gonna look at tourist homes, I think we should look at it in combination with non-residential at the same time, because there is a relationship there. And that, to me, is a more of the exercise, to me, gives a better direction for the work that we want to come back to inform our decision-making.
That's reasonable. I'm prepared to support this amendment. Thank you.
In speaking to the amending motion, I certainly understand the rationale, and it's a reasonable rationale in my opinion. However, I'm not going to support the motion because the Property Tax Task Force did look at non-residential rates, and the recommendation was the 55-45 split, based on assessments having stayed the same and also comparing with comparable properties. I see Councillor Hillstad's motion as specifically determining whether tourist homes, which are a subclass of residential technically, but for our policy purposes are lumped in with non-residential properties, to determine if that's actually still appropriate. And once we get that information, then we can have the discussion of should we no longer link them? Should we look at raising both? What is, but so I'm still more inclined to look at the narrower question around tourist homes rather than expanding it. That's just my opinion. Okay, I'm going to go with, I'll go with Councillor Marin first, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mayor Crowsert. I would like to speak in support of the amending motion as well. I think I know that the Property Tax Task Force looked at this at a higher level, but I think there's an opportunity here to get some more information back, and then further to Councillor Faubert's comments, just to have that information to make sure that we are including all of that context. So I would like to support the amending motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm a little mixed on this one, honestly. The Property Tax Task Force did delve into commercial rates in depth, but we didn't dive into the tourist home section as thoroughly as Councillor Hillstad is looking for here. just kind of a general comment. I'm really struggling with the, this rate should be tied to that rate, should be tied to that rate. I think all those rates are individual and should be looked at individually. I'll let others speak for a moment here and then I'll.
Okay, would anybody else like to speak to the amending motion? Councillor Hillstad?
Would I be able to ask a question of admin on the amending motion?
All right, go ahead.
I'm just curious with, if this motion were to pass, is there enough time to delve into this with the non-residential properties? Is there enough time for admin to come back with this, or does that change? Like if the tourist home one were to just pass, is a different workload than if both are passed? I'm just curious because it'll kind of affect my answer.
Ms. Gibbons?
The reality is, as long as we're looking at implementation for 2027, which your original motion speaks to, I think it is doable. It is a broader scope of work, and we would take the next year to understand what that is. But given we're looking at a full year, I think we can make either one work, but it would be a broader scope for sure and involve more work on admin side.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbons. Anyone wishing else to speak to the amending motion? Councillor Graham?
I think I'm going to fall on the side of narrowing the scope to the tourist homes. The Property Tax Task Force did dig into commercial rates thoroughly enough for my comfort level.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the amending motion? I'll call the question then on the amending motion. All those in favor? Opposed? The amending motion is defeated with Councillors Faubert, Murray, and Marin in favor. So now we're back to the original motion as proposed by Councillor Hillstad. I know that there were some that wanted to speak to it that we sidetracked here. So Councillor Murray, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Crowsert. Yeah, I'm prepared to support this motion. Tourist homes are an interesting subset of properties in this community, and there have been some big changes made to tourist homes in the last couple of years. I think, if anything, it's great to just even do a review of whether we're on the right track with some of those changes and whether further tweaks need to be made. So I will be supporting this. Thanks.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Councillor Hillstad, for bringing this forward. I think this is an interesting motion. I feel we've arbitrarily pegged things to the tourist home, and is that the right framework moving forward beyond? I'm not exactly sure. So I feel there's some interesting comparative analysis that can come forth from this, and I look forward to seeing what admin comes back with. Thank you.
I'm not certain that it's arbitrary. There were rationales spoken to it each time, but thank you for speaking to the motion. Next up is Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I echo my colleagues' comments on this one. This is, I think, an interesting exercise to go down. Tourist homes originally were, they are residential. They are a residential subclass, and they have essentially been commercialized because there was no boundaries around the limitations on how many days they could do it. So they've basically become vacation account, visitor account. So I look forward to this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Faubert.
Yeah, this is this one I'm torn on because the way that the Property Tax Task Force report was written, by tying the livability tax as well to the tourist home rate, there's context to looking at this. And while my previous motion wasn't comma and, it was no comma and, so I wanted things to be looked at in combination. I don't think I can support this at this time. I think that just a few months ago, we were setting the terms of reference for the Property Tax Task Force, and we could have put this in there and gotten this as part of that discussion as well. So I'm just confused as to why we're doing it now. Even in the future, having an analysis of this, I would still want the Property Tax Task Force to look at it as well. So I have a lot of concerns. I tried to, and so I'm at this point going to be more cautious in my approach here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe what's changed since the terms of reference for the Property Tax Task Force was set is that the task force essentially tied the tourist home rate and the livability tax program highest rate, which of course was the rationale adopted by council when it was previously set by the last council. And I think that that's the tie that brought this up. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. Who are those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried with Councillor Faubert opposed. All right, so now
Sorry, Mayor Crowser, I can't hear you. Sorry to jump in.
sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. While I was resetting my computer, I didn't hit my button so that you wouldn't hear my heavy typing.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking up. And please work on your lip reading. I'm just kidding, of course. So the next item for business is the livability budget amendment options. And so I'll look to, I'll just pull it up here, and I'll look to Mr. Young to provide the presentation. So whenever you're ready, welcome, and the microphone is yours.
All right. Okay. So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm here this afternoon to present on options for amendments to the livability budget. I'll start with our recommendations. Our recommendations, as included in the company report, are as follows. That Council amend the livability budget for 2026 and the business plans for 2027 and 2028 as presented. That Council cancel the following currently approved 2026 capital projects with livability reserve funding identified, and amend the capital plan for 2027 through 2031 as presented. And we're recommending we cancel but defer these two projects: CAP 7465 YWCA Mustache Lines project, and the CAP 7486, which is the Palliser pedestrian crossing design. And our last recommendation is that Council amend the funding for CAP 7481 Stoneworks Creek mitigation by replacing $350,000 from the livability reserve with funding from the general CAP reserve. A little background on why we're amending the 2026 livability budget. On April 2nd, the provincial government introduced the Municipal Affairs and Housing Statutes Amendment Act 2026, which is Bill 28. The bill will amend the MGA specifying that if a municipality establishes a residential assessment subclass for non-primary residences, that subclass would not apply to properties wholly or partially owned by an Alberta resident. This proposed amendment to the MGA will limit the town's scope in collecting the livability tax revenues as previously envisioned. The previously approved budget for the livability tax program was set at $10.3 million, based on estimates of 0.4% of the assessed values of applicable properties. Given the changes arising from Bill 28, Council may now wish to amend the previously approved budget to account for the anticipated changes in properties to which the program will now be applied to. As Council will remember, this is the current approved budget for the livability tax program, showing the budget for 2026 at 10.3 million and 10.5 million for 2027 and 2028. With anticipated impacts of Bill 28, excluding Alberta residents from the higher non-primary residency tax rates will lower the number of properties to which the program will apply, and hence the associated assessed values to which the tax would be applied. If council wishes to maintain collection at the previously intended rate at approximately 0.4% of the assessed value, the new projected program revenues would be 4.4 million for 2026, which is a 5.9 decrease from the originally $10.3 million in our currently approved budget. In calculating this estimate, administration has included some contingency as Bill 28 has not received royal assent yet, so the estimate could change. And if council does not approve the first recommendation and amend the livability budget, the currently approved livability budget would remain in place, and the revenues of 10.3 million would be levied on the non-primary residential properties not owned by an Alberta resident. This would exceed the originally intended tax rate of approximately 0.4% of the assessed values. I just want to reiterate that the amended program revenues would directly affect the livability reserve balances and the funded projects associated with the program. The program operations would remain largely unchanged as administrative workload doesn't scale with the program revenue changes. Administration has, however, reviewed the current operating costs included in the budget and is proposing amendments to the 2026 operating budget based on new information. Because of the reductions in anticipated program revenues, adjustments will be required to the 2026 capital projects, resulting in the funding and projects being redistributed over a longer period of time. So this table shows the recommended amendments to the budget. As you can see, the biggest amendment is to the residential taxes. So it goes from 10.3 to 4.4, change of 5.9 million. And the calculation is actually in attachment 2 in the package we sent out. Salaries, wages, and benefits has been amended for revised start dates and a position funded through the STREF grant funding for 2026. Postage and printing have both been increased to account for reissued notice of assessments to Alberta residents. Legal fees has been amended for new revised estimates for 2026. And lower professional fees anticipated based on actuals and also from STREF funding. And the result is a total cost savings of around $200,000. So administration's recommendation is to maintain the estimated 0.4% of assessed value previously communicated and amend the budget as presented in the previous slide. Based on the revised program revenues, the recommendations include that cap 7465 and 7486 be counseled for 2026, and that the capital plan for years 2027 through 2031 be amended to include them in the future years. The anticipated reduction in program revenues would also require a change in funding for Stoneworks Creek mitigation to replace some of the livability reserve funding and replace it with the general cap reserve to ensure continuity of grant funding associated with this project. Finally, the funding for housing providers would be postponed and the overall amount is reduced. This is the amended capital plan based on the anticipated reduction in program revenues. Overall, the change will result in a much longer window to achieve the originally anticipated outcomes of the program. And if you want to look at the original, we've attached that in attachment 4 of the package. So you can see that the Mustache Lands is funded over a longer period of time. This table shows the anticipated reserve balances with the funding from the program operations and the funding of the projects of the amended capital plan. As you can see, most of the program revenues each year will be spent. In the previous agenda item, the Property Task Force report, I'm going to call it PTTF, was presented for planning purposes, and the amended property tax policy was recommended for implementation beginning in the next taxation year, so for 2027. In the report, I'll repeat these again, the PTTF also made 3 recommendations in relation to the livability tax program, and they are that the livability tax rates should be set no higher than tourist home tax rates. Administrative costs of the livability tax program should be paid by general taxes, and include a CCH requisition increase in the vital homes levy and change the levy distribution. So with respect to the first one of the recommendations of the PTTF, that the livability tax rates be set no higher than tourist home tax rates. This is already achieved in the 2026 budget through existing recommendations to council. With the amendments as proposed, the combined livability tax program and municipal rate applied to non-primary, non-Alberta resident properties would be slightly below that of the tourist home rates. This is based on the previously communicated 0.4% of assessed values and leaves some contingency for further changes. In respect to PTTF recommendation number 2, the second recommendation was that administrative costs of the program should be paid for by general municipal taxes as the program benefits the entire community. Currently, the administrative costs are funded by revenues collected under the program. This is in accordance with the current approved reserve policy. Administration recommends that if council wants to follow this recommendation, that the change be applied for 2027. This would move approximately $1 million to the general municipal tax supported portion of the budget. But if you were to adopt this recommendation for 2026, this would move the tax increase net of growth from 6.7% to an estimated 9.5%, and would require amendment to both the livability budget and the general municipal portion of the budget. And for the PTTF recommendation number 3, this recommendation was to include the CCH requisition increase within the vital homes levy and change the distribution to 30% residential and 70% non-residential. This levy appears as a separate line item on the tax notice and is currently split 50-50 between residential and non-residential. And as with the previous recommendation, administration recommends that the change be applied to the 2027 tax year. And if adopted, this change would increase a total levy of $767,000 annually. At a 30-70 split, this means $230,000 will be collected from residential properties and $537,000 from non-residential properties. This would result in livability reserve balances being about $320,000 higher each year, allowing greater funding for programs and projects. And finally, if council could choose to identify alternative funding for any of the capital projects to replace the livability reserve funding to achieve the desired program outcomes in a shorter time horizon. And again, I'm just going to go through our conclusion and our recommendation.
So you don't need to read them
Okay.
again.
Okay.
Appreciate that. I appreciate your willingness to do so.
Okay.
I also appreciate that you've already done so, and so I'm not going to put you through it again since I'm also going to be reading them as well.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Young, for that presentation. Before you sit down, there may be some questions. So I will look to council to see if there are any questions. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. My question is in relation to the Bill 28 language. Part of the changes included wording around determining residency in the previous and current year. And I know that we wanted that language to just be the previous year, not the current year. Did that change in what was approved in the legislature, or does it include the current year, and how do we implement that in the program?
Right now, it hasn't changed. Right now, in everything that we do have current and previously, it's tied into the budget already, like our recommendation, so we have that current year wording included in here.
And I believe that that particular question won't affect these recommendations, because we're approving budget levels, but it would potentially affect changes to our subclassification bylaw,
Okay, yeah. I think,
which would come forward to us after Bill 28 receives royal assent.
And if I could, I think that's one of the reasons Mr. Young was alluding to, with the budget, we have allowed for some contingency because of some of those uncertainties.
Okay.
So historically, our assessment process has been based kind of retrospectively, so on use in the prior year, the property status as of December 31st. This inclusion of current or previous year introduces variability we haven't had before, so we're allowing some flexibility to allow for that.
okay, yeah. And I think that sort of my area of inquiry was around sort of that number, the number of unknown people who could be included in the livability tax, but we're not sure yet, and whether or not that variability in those total numbers would affect the budget significantly or not.
So ultimately, in setting the rates for this year, we have to move forward with the information that we have available right now. So the budget right now is based on the properties that we anticipate have made us aware either through either of our declaration, both our primary usage declaration and when we reached out again for properties to notify us if they were Albertans, or properties who have reached out to our team subsequently. So all of those have been accounted for currently. There may still be others out there. The transitional provisions of the bill speak to how we'll handle those. So we have a plan around that. And then we're anticipating that would potentially, if those were to come out, lead to some under collection, which is why we've given ourselves some room with what we're putting forward today. And we'll have greater clarity as to what that looks forward then later this year once we've had a full year of the program and have those revenues starting to collect and heard from properties.
So there will be an ability for people to engage in the program and provide their information to ensure that we have the most accurate information possible. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
And just for Councillor Marin's benefit, the answer is yes.
I'll speak more directly into the mic.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Marin, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. This is related. I'm just curious, the $4.4 million budget, the estimate, so that still includes the people who have declared that they are non-Albertan second homeowners and the undeclared, like the incomplete stat decks, is that true?
So this is based on the best information we have as of right now, based on what property owners have notified us. So if we have an indication that a property has an owner that meets the definition of Alberta resident, that's already been accounted for and taken out of basically the 4.4 million we have today.
So does it include those who have not completed their stat decks as if they are non-Albertan second homeowners at this time?
Dr. Cottle?
Yes, it does, and we've made it, all those folks have received 2 opportunities to declare, and we've made it clear in both that if you don't declare, you will be counted as a non-resident. So we've made it clear, and if they haven't completed it, that's the category they're in, yes.
Okay, thank you. And my understanding from Bill 28 that is if they have not declared yet they are Alberta residents, we will not be able to apply the tax to those homeowners. Is that still correct?
They would have to make us aware of that. There's no way we could know. We'll be obligated to assign them based on the best information we have. If the information we have is inaccurate, they will be able to engage, as Councillor Faubert just asked, to correct it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Young, for your presentation. I'm curious about the removal of the transfer to reserve to reimburse the funds allocated for partners for affordable housing. I don't see it sort of placed back in the budget anywhere else. How does that work from a financial perspective? Does it just become like an unfunded project, or is it somewhere I'm not seeing in sort of the longer range plan?
My understanding, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're just collecting less revenue, so what we're able to fund for housing providers in the future is going to be a lot lower than what we had originally anticipated. So it's basically less projects we'll be able to fund in the future.
Sorry, so we're talking about the funding for
About-
housing providers line item?
Reimburse the funds allocated to the Partners for Affordable Housing.
Sorry, so that's on the operating side. That's the,
Transfer to general operating reserve, 250,000.
yeah. So that's still in each version. So sorry, maybe I'm just misunderstanding your question,
Sorry.
Councillor
You know
Murray.
what? I saw a gap in it's because it's over 2 lines. My apologies for.
Oh, that's
yes.
okay.
No, it's good to seek the clarity.
My other question is around the recommendations from the Property Task Force and sort of the recommendations on options 2 and 3. I can understand the complication of implementing option 2 for the 2026 taxation year, because that would be a pretty big change. When it comes to option 3, which would be to fund the full requisition from the CCH levy, that seems to me anyways to be a more simple, straightforward change. I'm kind of curious maybe if you could give the rationale behind why you wouldn't be recommending that for the 2026 year.
Really, we're just trying to just manage all the moving pieces here and minimize livability as it currently stands. All of the revenues collected through the program are used ultimately on the program expenses, or the usages through the reserve to the projects and programs funded through it. So it's to a certain extent a standalone. Two, as we'd highlighted in the report, opens up kind of the general municipal taxation piece if we're redistributing that across the rest of the tax base. To a certain extent, the CCH levy does that as well. It does show up as a separate line item on a property owner's tax notice. It is another separate budget within our overall municipal budget for housing. And so again, for the purposes of all the moving pieces we have right now with us still waiting for royal assent on Bill 28, it was really just about handling these livability pieces right now, and also the time where we're at. 2026 is the last year of our current approved budgeted 2-year cycle, so we'll be going into another full budget cycle here right away. So really with recommendations 2 and 3, we'll be talking about this all again in the Finance Committee in the fall, and it felt like a good opportunity to open up some of these conversations rather than rushing to accommodate more of these pieces given where we're at in our timing.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Yong, for your presentation. Could you please bring up the amended capital plan for projects? It shows the various years. I just wanted to check in on that. Okay, so when I look at this, and this is, I think, maybe a bit more for the public to understand as well, too. There's that line that says funding for housing providers, and we've got for 2026, 0, 2027, 0, 2028, 0, 2029, 2030, 0. And so really, in effect, what does that mean for the reality of what will happen to our Palliser lands in terms of development?
So that was the item that is, I would say, most directly impacted by the reduced anticipated program revenues. So we've tried to meet all of the other existing amounts. So you can see the YWCA amount of 10 million in the previous plan. It was over 2 years. Now we've stretched it over 4. We've kept Stoneworks Creek and Altalink funded. That helps unlock more lands for development. The Palliser pedestrian crossing we've deferred a few years. But really where you see the most of the impact of the lower program anticipated collection is in that line item. I believe in our current capital plan, it was, well, it's there, sorry, in the second asterisk. Originally we had 12.2 million, now we're looking at 2.5, and much later implementation. So trying to recall back to what the intent of that was, but that was really around, I believe, us coming up with municipal programming to help support housing providers through either our existing fee structure and some of those pieces. So it means the money allocated to some of those future town programs will happen later and we'll have less earmarked overall. Sorry, Mayor Krauser.
So, just to reframe though, because we're dealing with reduced amounts overall, the type of funding that would be provided for a housing provider is like the type of funding provided for the YWCA Mustache Lands project. And so in fact, we are providing, according to the amended capital plan, approximately 2.1 to 2.9 million per year, every year. And then instead of being up in that top line where it's designated to a certain project, it's available to other unspecified projects at this time. So I actually see, as a result of the amended capital plan due to less funds, it's actually those two lines provide the same thing, but instead of having some go to a specified and unspecified, we've had to move it around. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that would be a fair statement as well. And as a reminder, there is also the money shows up as grants, but that would be related to our support for purpose-built rental. That remains in our operating budget as well. So there is that support for housing providers who are providing purpose-built rental properties. That program still exists under the council-approved policy and remains funded as well.
Okay.
But in terms of the landscape, for all intents and purposes, over these next 4 years for council, we will hopefully see the completion of 100 Palliser, which provides about 144 units. And hopefully this YWCA project also comes to fruition as well. But other than that, nothing.
So I'll turn to Ms. Smithers.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add for that funding for housing providers line item, council members will remember recently there was a motion directing administration to come up with some principles around fee waivers for affordable housing projects, or at least grants to cover the fees for those projects. That was initiated by the Mustache Lands project when council chose to waive the development and building permit fees. We need to offset those waivers or grants when they do happen. So that would be another example of something that would come out of this funding for housing providers line item that would now start in 2031.
Thank you. Councillor Maude, did you have a further question?
And just kind of following your train of thought there, Ms. Smithers. So for example, if we are to say embark on a path of like waiving fees, et cetera, and this line item is 00000, those fees need to be made up somewhere. And so I'm assuming that would be put upon the general ratepayer.
Ms. Smithers?
That's kind of speculating right now because we haven't put the work in. I think when this funding for housing providers bucket of funds was identified as part of the livability budget, that was one of the specific things we looked at, offsetting the costs of getting affordable housing built. So where that fee waiver funding could come from otherwise, we have not thought that through at this point.
There's other potential reserves as well that would be part of the consideration.
Potentially.
Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, everybody. A couple of questions. We were clear on the budget of $10.3 million with the public over this past couple of years, correct?
Is that for finance to answer?
Communications, maybe. But
Sorry, maybe could you clarify the question then?
So you stated that we've been clear on the 0.4% with residents. We were also, that was derived from a budget of $10.3 million.
No, that's actually incorrect. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to incorrect it. The Finance Committee had in the fall of 2024, had discussions around where we should set livability tax rates. The recommended amount was at a 0.4% of assessed value equivalency. That translated to a budget that I think was about $12 million. Then, when it came to council, new information, or because as we go along, we get better information. New information showed that it would actually be at 10.3. So the question was made to the council at the time, do you want to increase the equivalency from 0.4, or do you want to go to something higher to maintain the 12.3? And the council at the time says, let's say at 0.4. So we were very clear about 0.4 was where the previous council had set it at. Wherever that budget arrived at, it was the 0.4 that was the important part, because that was equivalent to the tourist home amount.
Thank you, Your Worship. In our communications with the province, have they expressed any concerns over the rate that we may charge?
Go to Dr. Cottle for that.
We've never discussed rates with the province. No.
Thank you.
I have had conversations with Minister Williams that at the rates that we were currently considering, it would result in about a $6 million difference between the total amounts that we expected to collect from that. I spoke to him about this yesterday. He recognized that the expectation has changed for us because of the changes to the statute. We did not specifically discuss potentially higher rates or staying at the same, except that it was noted that staying at the same, it would be a lower amount.
Thank you. And are there any concerns in the MGA with regards to the 5-to-1 commercial to residential tax ratios?
No, I pulled the section reference because I always forget the exact section number, but section 358.1 of the MGA does speak to, as you allude to, the maximum tax ratio that specifies that no municipality other than those that are non-conforming shall in any year have a tax ratio greater than 5-to-1. But as you alluded to, when they speak to tax ratio, that means the highest non-residential tax rate to the lowest residential tax rate. So here where we're speaking to the livability tax program rates, even tourist home rates, and the primary resident rates, those are all within the residential subclass. And so that section of the MGA, my understanding is, would not apply. So no concerns with respect to the MGA and tax ratios.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Ma, question?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Question towards admin, I want to make sure I've got the right numbers in my head. At one point, we were discussing a number of how many units we needed for non-market by 2030. And what was that target number that came about? Was it 2,000 at one point? It's over 2,000? Okay.
So I can provide clarity because
sir.
it was actually based on my research that was provided to administration. It's based in the Bow Valley Regional Housing. They suggest by 2041 that Canmore will need 3,400 units of housing, affordable housing. For us, that means non-market.
Okay.
2,000 of that was needed by 2031, with the other 1,400 by 2041. That's where those numbers came from.
Thank you for that clarity, Your Worship. And so I just want to get my numbers straight again with administration. So with our 100 Palliser project, I believe it's 144 units. And if the higher ground project from YWCA is to come to fruition, how many units is that?
Ms. Smithers or Dr.
Yeah,
Cobb?
it's approximately 300 when it's fully built out.
Okay, so 300 plus 144, that puts us around 450. And looking at this current thing up to 2030, there's no additional money for funding for housing providers. So that puts us at 450 units versus 2,000 needed. Is that pretty much an accurate comparison of where we're at from this year?
When we're looking at what's in the pipe for CCH and YWCA, yes, it does not account for other projects that we would be seeing, for example, in the Three Sisters area with some of their density bonusing for affordable housing. We'd be seeing some additional units there as well.
Yeah, so there will be...
We wouldn't be at the 2,000 plus unit count by any stretch, but yeah, there would be more than just the YWCA and CCH.
Oh, so, yeah, thank you for clarifying. So it'll be 450 plus what private developers may deem to bring forward between now and 2030 for non-market units. And even if we're like, say, generous, we said they brought in 500, we'd be 1,000 units short per se between now and 2030 in like a best case scenario.
My crystal ball is not that good.
Okay. My crystal ball says we'll be short.
Well, we're short right now, and the task has been about funding. And so the question is where we can get funding. And
Thank you.
this is not the only source,
No, for sure.
potentially, but we don't have other things lined up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much to everyone who provided answers and for that presentation, Mr. Young. Okay, so we are now at the point of making a motion. Councillor Ma, do I understand correctly that you'll be wanting to bring forward an amending motion to the first recommended motion there?
Yes, Your Worship. I think
Okay.
in light of everything that I heard from admin, that just give you some more context, and I need a little bit of time just to craft that motion, please.
Yes, okay.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
yeah, so what I'm going to suggest, and I'm gonna look to admin, how do you feel if I say we take a break till 3:30? Okay, we're gonna take a break till 3:30. As an amending motion is being crafted, what I would really ask is, Councillor Ma, if you can be communicating with administration about what you would like to do. Once you've communicated what you'd like to do, then if everybody could leave administration to take a look at it without any other poking and prodding, it will allow the most efficient recommendation and assistance provided to you. Okay,
Thank you, sir.
Sounds good? All right, so we'll take a recess till 3:30. All right, so I'll wait to hear that we are streaming again. Okay, we are back. Thanks for everyone's patience. Democracy is sometimes a little bit messy, and that's okay. And I appreciate the efforts that administration has done in working with Councillor Ma to come up with an amending motion that he's going to present, and they've worked through potential changes to other motions if that's successful. But we'll have to take one thing at a time here. So the first thing that I will do is I will move that council amend the livability budget for 2026 and the business plans for 2027 and 2028 as presented. And by as presented, that's referencing the administration recommendations in the agenda package. Just to set the context, if this motion passes, then we're talking about the $4.4 million budget. And then we would proceed with the motions as set out in the agenda. If this motion is amended and is amended, then the following motions will also be adjusted. If this motion is not amended and is defeated, then the status quo remains. The 10.3 budget remains in place, and the following two motions are moot. Right. Okay. So that's where we're at. So now there's a motion on the table that we accept the recommended by administration, and I will hand it over to Councillor Ma, who would like to make an amending motion.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship, and I would like to present an amending motion here. Ms. Breyer, thank you. Okay, so my motion is to change the original motion by inserting 8.5 million in between budget and 4, by inserting 6-year capital plan after 2028. And if it's possible to bring up the spreadsheet, I can speak a little more eloquently to the details. Okay. Thank you here. So the prior motion was 4.4, and I've changed that to, in this proposal, to 8.5 in terms of the residential taxes for livability. A lot of these pieces here are essentially the same as prior. However, one of the big pieces is line 14 transfers to livability reserve. And in that amount, would it be possible to go to the next attachment, Briar, and I can speak towards that? Thank you. Okay, so as we're looking at the amended capital plan for projects here, in 2026, you'll see that there's a $4 million sum of money given to the YWCA sooner. And what this has done is to, well, this is a really big project. And I think it signals to the province that we are trying our best to work with other organizations to address our housing issues. You'll also see that, as in the original one, we have the Stoneworks Creek mitigation for $2.7 million. And this is in here, as noted by administration before. This is vitally important to unlock land. And then as we scroll down, we have the typical funding CCH rec of $320. Now, as we move forward, okay, into the 2027 year, to expedite the YWCA, we're at a $5 million. But I think one of the line items I'm really excited about is line 7 there, funding for housing providers. And that's $1 million. And what that has done is that we'll be eventually getting to a point where 100 Palliser, that project will be completed, and CCH will need seed funding and money to develop another building and to get that started. And so I think that's really helpful to get that there. You'll also see underneath that the AltaLink transmission, and that is done to, as noted, similar to the Stoneworks Creek, unlock more units. And then fast forwarding into 2028, there's $1 million for YWCA because we front-ended our donation money to get the YWCA Mustache Lands project going. And then we'll have work back towards the Palliser pedestrian crossing. And then the other piece I'm quite excited about is the funding for housing providers of $5 million. Now, when it comes to funding for housing providers, it could be CCH, but it could also be done in various other things. We could use that funding towards opportunistic land purchase. You know, for example, there are things that come up. Perhaps there's lands in Larch. I know one popular thing that of recent memories, like the GM lot. These are sort of opportunities when they come up. If we have funding, we can actually reach out and do them. And so with all those pieces there, The rate works out to, I know the rate's a bit of a thing, and it comes out to 0.77. And with this here, as noted before, our community for the last 2 censuses has the highest income disparity in all of Canada. That's a big deal. And also, we are going to be short for non-market units. And I think this sort of plan here gets us closer, which I think is really a responsible thing to do. When we talk about comparators, Property Tax Task Force, if my fellow councilors take a look at page 53 of the report from the Property Tax Task Force, it says for comparators, they use tourism-based communities, okay? And so some of them are Jasper, Banff, Golden, Tofino, Euclid, Squamish, Revelstoke, Vernon, the Soyuz, Fernie, Invermere, and Summerland. Now, 2 of those communities, Jasper and Banff, they're in the national park, so they have a bit of a different setup. But many of these other ones, such as Golden, Tofino, Euclid, Revelstoke, Osoyoos, Fernie, Invermere, these are all resort municipalities. So they actually have tools to help their communities move forward. And the other ones that are on this list of comparators, Squamish, Vernon, and Summerland, they actually have their own vacancy taxes that start at 1%. So I feel here, if we're working at a 0.77, and then speaking within the context of our comparators that have more tools or different tools, I do not think this is an unreasonable ask, especially in light of the challenges that our community is facing. And so I respectfully would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, thank you very much. So essentially, the amending motion is to accept a budget of 8.5 million for 2026, and to adopt the, or inserting the 6-year capital plan after 2028, which is that document that you were just walking us through for the 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Does everyone understand the motion, or are there some questions about it before we speak to the amending motion? Looking for questions of clarification right now. Just I want to make sure that everybody's aware what we're debating.
Should we bring up the...
Okay. Is it helpful for people to bring up the Excel again? There it is. Okay, so I think, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think that everybody understands the amending motion that's on the table brought by Councillor Ma, and you've spoken to it. Now looking to see if anyone else would like to speak to the amending motion. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Councillor Ma for the amending motion. I'm not at this time prepared to support changing this budget in this manner. I have concerns about our ability to even raise 4.4 million based on the numbers provided, where 70% of the units being counted in this program are still in an unknown category and could change over the short term. I get that housing is an issue, but we're also actually doing a lot about it. Every time I leave my home, I see 2 buildings under construction that are fully funded and being developed by Canmore Community Housing under our direction to provide housing for our community. Last week, I attended an open house by the YWCA Banff and an update on their project on the Mustache lands. We are continuing to fund housing and to find new ways to fund housing. But if the ways that we are creating to fund housing, if we alter them to a point where they become unviable, then we don't actually get anything out of them. I much prefer for us to actually launch the livability tax before we start reverse engineering it for a list of projects that are unfunded. This is a wish list, and it is my wish list as well. But I'm not prepared to go against the principles of fairness and that were just explained to us by the Property Tax Task Force presentation. This is an unfair burden on one subclass, and I'm not prepared to support it at this level. It doesn't align with the way council has come up to this point in terms of keeping it at a tourist home rate. It doesn't align with the Property Tax Task Force recommendations, and it doesn't align with the principles of fairness and tax policy. I think that this is premature. We're too soon to get into these weeds and to start putting these numbers. I feel that the budget process in the winter is a far more appropriate place to start considering this, because we'll actually have a better understanding at that point of the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marin?
Thank you, Mayor Crowser. Thank you for the amending motion. I do not support it, but I want to be very clear that I'm not opposed to having more funding for housing providers. So I think that's important. I don't think this is the way to do it. So I think we're trying to get more funding from a very small portion of our community, and we need to actually look at the larger community and how we can structure a program that provides funding from the commercial part of our community, from the other parts of our residential community. But I think this is unfair to just that small portion of our community. And also, Councillor Ma referred to the income disparity. Absolutely, there's income disparity, but I think this proposal also makes the assumption that all of those non-Albertan second homeowners in Canmore are going to cover that funding gap that we have for affordable housing or for housing providers. So I'm not prepared to support it. I also want to mention, having been on the Property Tax Task Force, we were very cautious about using those comparator municipalities. We had lots of conversations about them. There was different things that were inputs into our recommendations on the task force, and that was just one of them. And we also determined in that task force that Canmore is unlike all of those comparators. So I just want to mention as well that using those to make this significant change to this program, I would be very cautious about doing that as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I would add just on that one screen, it also was about, it was an interesting point that Councillor Ma made about the
tools they have.
what other resources they have, but that particular screen was about assessment split.
No, I was just using the list.
Yeah. You were just using the list, right? Okay, so Councillor Graham. Thank you, Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Ma, for bringing this forward. I'm happy to support this motion. Here's what we know. We need 2,000 units of non-market housing in the next 5 years. If the average build price is $500,000, which we all know would be very optimistic, we need about $100,000 per unit. That comes with a total price tag of about $200 million. The more debt we add to each of those funding stacks decreases affordability. I know that CCH has a wait list of 527 people on it. I know that the wait list is between 15 and 23 months. I know that the average house price is over $2 million now. I know that the average rent is over $2,000 a month for a 1-bedroom, and for a 3-bedroom, it's $4,500. I know that as a result of being on the CCH executive director hiring committee, many of the applicants were motivated to apply because of Canmore's political will to significantly move the needle with regards to non-market housing. I know that $4.4 million in the Livability tax program would provide no funding for CCH for the next several years from that budget, which would drastically affect the ability to address our housing crisis. I know that Canmore residents and businesses have been supporting CCH in non-market housing for 20 years and will continue to do so through the CCH levy. I know that affordability directly affects our local businesses' viability and our local economy. I know that the province hasn't had or raised any concerns about the rate that we charge. They did have concerns about protecting Albertans. I am protecting Albertans from this economic situation that we have. I know that the province wants to double tourism over the next decade. I know that the funding from the province is half of what it was 10 years ago in real dollars. I know that for 20 years we've been refused any sort of resort status or other tools that would help us address this wicked problem. I know that there are unfortunately no other viable solutions. I know that the courts and the province have both validated our approach. I know that I was explicit during the last election on my stance on this issue. My voter count increased from the previous election, and I know that I have a mandate from voters to support the livability tax budget. I know that 0.77% would still be the lowest in the entire country. Almost all municipalities start at 1% and go as high as 5%. Affordability is the number 1 threat to Canmore and the Bow Valley. The existential crisis, we have said. We are judged not by what we say, but more importantly by what we do. Actions speak louder than words. Please judge us by what we do and not just what we say. We have talked about being bold. We have talked about our desires to courageously address affordability. We have talked about strengthening local businesses. We have talked about a fully functioning and complete community. We have talked about protecting locals from fierce market forces. We have talked about saving the fabric of this community from very much from this crisis. Sorry. Now, after 5 long years, after 2 court rulings, after affirmation by the province, after significant political capital, and many long hours by our administration, we are at the precipice of true and lasting action. I, personally, want to be proud of this day, knowing I left nothing behind. I left no one behind. And I did everything I could to serve this place we all love. Today will be a defining moment for all of us. I hope that this amending motion gets your support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. Unfortunately, I will not be able to support this amending motion. And I say that with a degree of reluctance, because I look at this budget and I mean, it would be really something that would make a real tangible difference in our community. I've been on the board for Canmore Community Housing for over 7 years now. And I mean, I can draw a straight line between what this kind of funding that we could collect could do for affordability to make a real aggressive dent in a major problem, probably the biggest problem this community has. And I would love to talk about these numbers during a regular budget cycle. I will echo what Councillor Faubert and Councillor Marin have already said. I think we need to be talking about this in an appropriate way, in a way that really aligns with good governance and predictable governance. Effectively doubling that 0.4% at the 11th hour just before we set tax rates, I don't think is an appropriate thing to be doing. And it's also, we did just accept that property tax force report, one of the recommendations being to not set it above the tourist homes. So I think we need to go along with that as well. So I would love to have, again, conversations about these kinds of numbers at Finance Committee during the regular budget cycle, but I will not be supporting this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you for this motion. Yeah, there's a lot of good work that on a very short time span that you managed to pull up quite the motion here, and yes, it would be great. I'm going to echo a lot of what Councillor Murray just stated. At this time, I'm not going to be able to support it. I think right now our focus should just be getting this off the ground. It's been delayed multiple times. Timelines are tight, and I think right now with where we've had it at, yes, it's unfortunate that we've lost a little bit over half of our potential funding pool. But again, that was a choice made by the province, but at the same time, they could have also just canceled it. And we worked with them and they worked with us to at least give us something. It might not be exactly what we want, but I'm hoping that that relationship building that we were doing with the province, that there will be other funding methods that become available to us. Of course, would be nice to get the money sooner than later, and hopefully other opportunities present themselves. But again, as Councillor Murray just stated, at budget time, if we wanted to look at these numbers again, I'd be open to that. But for me, this is what we've had out in the community for a long time now, and to just add on extra at the 11th hour, I don't feel right with that. I would need more time to digest, and I need to see just, again, these would be fantastic numbers, and I'm hoping that we can find other ways to get some of this funding. But I won't be able to support this motion at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. And in speaking to the motion, I want to put forward some things that I'm hearing from everyone. I'm hearing from everyone, all of council, that housing is a priority. And I don't think that there's anyone that said that we wouldn't love to have this funding available. But there's a lot of good arguments that have also been raised that question whether we should take this jump right now. I will not be supporting this amending motion. We've had multiple conversations at the council level around the level of taxation. And regardless of what the budget total was, we came in at 0.4 of assessed value equivalency. And I say equivalency because we don't actually take assessed value and multiply it by 0.4%. We set a mill rate that's approximate to that. That's equivalent to tourist homes. That connection between taxing second homeowners and taxing another type of residential unit in our town already is a powerful, persuasive element for me. The fact that we are already tax properties at that level speaks to me as to fairness. I get it that it's less amount than we had anticipated when we were expecting to tax all second homeowners. But in working with the government and doing so positively, recognizing that the provincial government could very well have changed the rules entirely to prevent us from bringing a tax of this nature. I think that we have to also be respectful that they were doing so in the context that we had set, and that was around about a 0.4% equivalency. I'm not adverse to having a discussion in the future once we have more information, once we have a little time under our belts. I also want to note that this is not the only source of funding. I actually want to get to the numbers that we had originally been anticipating, and I'm not done with advocating. I had 5 meetings yesterday at the legislature. I met with the Minister of Municipal Affairs. I met with the Minister of Affordability and Utilities. I met with the Minister of Parks and Forestry. I met with the Minister of Tourism and Sport. And I met with a representative of the Premier's office. And in doing so, I spoke to what is actually happening in Canmore right now and all the positive movement that we have, including work towards meeting, and I stressed, our most dire need. Well, as I've always said, actually, it's one of our two existential threats. And I laid the foundation that we're here to work together, and I laid the foundation for further discussion around support for our tourism infrastructure and laying the ground and planting seeds about additional certain elements that will address the very unique situation that Canmore finds itself in. I do want people to judge us by what we do. We have funded the Palliser project. We have worked with the province to get land for the Mustache Lands project. We have been working with the YWCA for that project. We have approved ARPs, both along Palliser Trail as well as in the Three Sisters, that will produce a lot of non-market housing, minimum of 1,000 in the Palliser area, and also thousands in the Three Sisters area, but on a different timeline. But we will start to see the fruit of that in the next couple of years. I saw an update that came out just today that shows the amount of housing that is coming forth, and it's actually above what was anticipated on a percentage basis based on what's being built. We have also approved the CRPS lands that will produce 40 units, so 1/3 as affordable housing. We have put in a policy that encourages purpose-built rentals. We have changed the landscape around affordable housing, and the Livability Reserve is expected to be a major source of funding, but I am not giving up on it being the only source. When we take a look at potentially relieving development fees for affordable housing, there are other sources for that. We didn't use the Livability Reserve for the 100 Palliser. We are looking at other options such as around debt limits that would allow us on a transitional or a short-term basis to potentially exceed our debt limit, and then it's taken out by the operational funding or the purchase of those units. That's something that we've put to the province. They have made no indication that they will accept that, but it's things like that that we'll continue to push for. And yesterday I was also continuing to advocate for tools that will allow us to raise revenue in a different way. I believe that the budget deliberations in the fall is an excellent time to resume conversation based on information that we have at that time, and also take a look at potential alternative fundings. For example, I see that the Palliser pedestrian crossing has been put back in the recommended motion. Well, we can certainly have a discussion about potentially funding that design in a different way. Rather than wait till 2030, we could move that a lot closer so that we could be shovel ready and start to look for grants for that. Those are all discussions that we can come. I would hate for anyone to walk away from this seeing this as turning away from our commitments, turning away from our priorities. We have remained committed. The past council, and with this approval of the recommended motion, this council is still doing more and better than those that have gone before us. And we will continue to work hard to reach those goals. So all of that to say that I won't be supporting this motion. I will be supporting the recommended motion. Councillor Ma, to close.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to my fellow councillors for speaking. For sure, we have things that are happening. My concern is it's not enough soon enough. And yeah, in addressing, we do have, for example, Mustache Lands, we do have Palliser coming in gradually, slowly. as I've spoken before, there's many people in our community, the luxury of time is not a luxury that they have. And in terms of decision-making, pushing things off to the fall, I can see where some of you guys are coming from, but sometimes, decision-making is not convenient. And if we're gonna speak about decisions, there's a subset of the community, these are the decisions they have to think about. Can I work another shift at my second job? Which of my kids I need to disappoint to tell them they're gonna have to cancel camp? What happens if I get sick? What am I gonna leave off my grocery list? Which bill can I afford to pay last? Will this be another year where there's no vacation? Is this the year we just give up and leave town? Contrast that to another subset of the community where their biggest decision is, should we come out to our second home this weekend? That's not a judgment, that's just a reality of the decision subset. Those are two very different scenarios, and I know who I'll be making a decision for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I do feel a need to address your last comments, because I think that we all are aware of those circumstances. I think we've all lost friends, we've all lost family members that have had to move away. My kids, this is their hometown and they can't afford to live here. I have had to move before, fortunate enough to get into a house that was more expensive than I thought I'd ever have to pay, and that cost more than anyone's supposed to be spending of their income. I moved several times, and none of that was my choice. And there's a lot of sacrifice that have to be made. And so I think we all know that. And I don't think anybody here is saying that that's something we shouldn't be doing something about. I do really hesitate to discarding all that we've done and all that this program can represent, even at the lower budget amount. This is major progress, and I would hate to see this as characterized as a black day. I think it's still a very, very positive day when we're talking about moving forward with housing. We have an amending motion on the table. I'm now going to call the question. All those in favor of the amending motion? Those opposed? The motion is defeated with Councillors Ma and Graham in support. That brings us back to our original motion. For all the reasons that I spoke to just now in the amending motion, I support this budget coming in at the 4.4. Please know, and I want to reiterate, that if you support this motion, you're supporting administration going and building the mill rates around a $4.4 million budget for the Livability tax program. If you don't support this motion, then it means the status quo is in place, and so that is directing administration to go build mill rates around a $10.3 million Livability tax program budget. Would anybody like to speak to this motion? Councillor Faubert.
I guess it's me first. Thank you, Your Worship. So the original motion is for the livability budget amendments. At this time, I am not prepared to vote in favor because provincial legislative changes, I believe, have fundamentally altered the delivery of this program, and I think its viability in the long term. I have serious concerns about the definition in the legislation changes around the current year. I'm concerned about the potential for out-of-province owners to add Albertans as a partial owner on title. And I also have concern about the number of undeclared, the numbers of undeclared homes in this program that are, so, and when I add those all together, I have a lot of uncertainty and concern around that 4.4 million amount. And it's not because I don't believe in the principles and want to move forward with successful programs. It's because I need to have confidence in what we're doing. I believe and I'm not saying that I'm against this motion because if it fails, I would be in support of the prior motion. In the event, which I doubt, this motion fails, I would be prepared to put forward an alternative direction. I don't think that that's necessary, but I just want to be absolutely clear that I'm not voting the way I'm voting because I want this to revert to what was there before. I think some more time and more understanding around the implications of the legislation change will lead to more certainty and around what exactly the actual collection amount for the livability tax will be or could be. And it's really important I think, to understand that the previous motion that we just debated, right, kind of is focusing on what we need. And I think that the first step and the first stage is to focus on what can this program deliver and still meet principles of fairness in taxation that were presented and part of the property tax task force as well. And so I am more cautious in moving forward to get to success with this program. And I want to make sure that my decision making is based on information that I have moving forward, not fear. I understand how my colleagues feel very strongly and passionately about moving forward with this program, and I respect that, and I respect that they see in this a much larger solution than I see as a potential. But I'm not here because I think the sky is falling. I think that we, more than any other community maybe in Canada, have spent over 20 years actually working on this problem and creating solutions. And what we have here with the Livability Tax Program is just another example of innovative solution development. Now, I might have a different idea of how to get to the finish line than my colleagues, and that's okay, because I also ran on that in the election too. So I'm just doing what I said I would do as well. I think it's really important that it's easy to feel strongly about what's happening in our community because this is an issue and this is a challenge. This is a crisis. We haven't declared a housing crisis, but I do believe the spectrum of housing, the price points, the lack of affordability and availability, and the fact that our market is no longer even tied to the provincial or national housing markets in any way whatsoever means we do have to do something. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to move into the future because that's kind of what we need. We need to move into the future and better understand how the changes to the MGA will affect us in terms of the ability to implement this tax in a way that will collect enough money to make a difference in terms of the housing programs that we want to fund. I think that there is potential there, but I'm not sure that the numbers that are in front of me are clear enough because of some of those uncertainties, those uncertainties are not created by anyone in this room or by any of the work that we've done. It's been created by the context that we live in and the fact that the province changed the legislation. So this is where I'm at right now. I know in the future that there could and may well be a point in time where I am prepared to support the program, and I look forward to continuing to work together with my colleagues to deliver on our strategic priorities. Thank you.
Councillor Faubert, I have a couple of questions for you with regards to the comments you made. Whether or not we proceed with the Livability tax program is not the subject of the motion. The subject of the motion is which budget are we going to go with? Is it the 4.4 or the 10.3? And so I don't understand your rationale, because what you have described is actually exacerbated if this motion is defeated, because it will then be the 10.3. So I was just wondering if you recognize that defeating of this motion actually means support for the 10.3.
If the motion was defeated and a follow-up motion was proposed and passed that provided new direction, then it wouldn't be the $10 million budget. I'd reject the framing of this vote in that way, totally. I'm not like, right? I am.
So what alternative are you thinking of? Because obviously that is something that could affect our decision.
I think an alternative would be delaying implementation to 2027.
Okay, so just to give you a heads up and give council a heads up, the amending motion made on May 5th was to add the options to delay or cancel the program. Under section 54 of our procedural bylaws, says any motion substantially of the same nature cannot be voted on again for another 6 months. That's the ruling I'll be making, because council essentially decided we're not prepared to consider options of delay or canceling. And so
I would like to follow that up by suggesting that my motion last week was not that. My motion was to direct administration to return with an analysis of alternatives in the report that was presented us today. What I wanted was an analysis of those alternatives from administration. If last week I wanted to put forward a motion to delay or cancel it, that would have been the motion, but that's not what I did. Even though some people felt like that was my motion, that was not what I was debating, and that's not what I put forward. And so
council had indicated that they're not prepared to consider those options being added for analysis. I'm going to be ruling that it's substantially the same, and therefore ruling it out of order. The option that's then available is for you to ask council to vote on that to see if they in fact support that ruling. So if you want to get to that point, that's the direction.
I haven't even put, there is no motion on the table to rule out of order to even appeal.
I just want you to know that before you vote, that's what's going to happen, so you're making your vote well-informed.
I am making my vote well-informed, and I've clearly explained, I thought, why I have apprehensions moving forward at this time with a change to the budget in any, right?
Yeah.
And so that's.
And I heard that that's what you said. And you can wish that it doesn't mean that it will revert to the 10.3, but in fact it will revert to the 10.3. So even though you're saying you don't want to, it's actually opposite, and that's why I'm very confused. And
I'm voting for the motion in front of me, and I know that it's been set up to frame it this way for me, and that's fine. I'm still going to vote the way I'm
There's no
voting.
conspiracy here. The question is arisen because there's changes to who is eligible for the program, which means that less funds at the previous set amounts will be raised. This council approved a budget at 10.3. That stands right now. That is the current direction to administration. If there is any other, if we are wanting to give them direction for a different amount, they need to have a motion. And so that's what this is all about. There's no conspiracy. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm prepared to support the motion on the floor right now. And I say this actually echoing many of the concerns about some of the implementation that Councillor Faubert has raised. But on the balance, I believe it is time to vote for this amended livability budget and the business plans for 2027 and 2028. We've created something that's very new and unique for Canmore, a made-in-Canmore solution for a problem that's not unique to Canmore, but is very acute in Canmore here. And it's unrealistic to think that right out of the gate we will have designed a flawless program. I believe that implementation of the program will allow us to work out some of the kinks. We have a program that is absolutely viable, that has been cleared the legal hurdles that it needed to clear for implementation. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who has worked on this for so many years, right down from the Livability Task Force to the previous and current council, and to everyone in administration who's been doing such a heavy lift, especially to the finance department, who has been crunching some numbers in a very short period of time. We've had to circle the runway a few times on this one, but the courts have weighed in, the province has weighed in, and unfortunately we can't collect the amounts that we were hoping to, but we have something. We still have something, and the landing gear will be down with this vote. We'll be hitting the runway when we do the set the tax rates at the end of the month here, and then hopefully we can finally say we have it, and let's move forward and create something really great for our community. So yes, I will be voting in support of this. With exciting hopes for the future.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hillstad?
I will also be voting in support of this motion. Again, sure, we're not going to know if some of those numbers will change. If they do, I guess worst comes to worst, we have another budget amendment later, or it just means less money goes into reserves. So I'm not concerned about it destroying the program or anything. We have some variables that we don't know about, but that's inherent with any new program. We work the kinks out as we go along, and we got to start somewhere. So again, happy to support this. Thanks to all of the work that has been done over these last few years now. It's been a interesting road, and hopefully we're getting there.
Thank you. Councillor? I will be speaking in support of this motion. I believe the rationale remains for us to aim at that 0.4. I know that none of the reserves will be spent until we actually have the funds, because you can't spend money from reserves until they're actually there. So I'm not concerned that we will be spending money without having it. I am very confident that we will be getting funding through this program that will get us, if not all, as much, or definitely over our administrative costs. So I feel that this is a good move forward. I would really appreciate if we, given the importance of this question, if we heard from all councillors. But if you don't want to speak, well, that's up to you as well. Councillor Marin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Krauser. Thank you for all of the comments, for the conversations. I have significant concerns about this budget. Two primary ones. So the first one are that the $4.4 million is based on an assumption about statutory declarations that were not completed. So I'm not certain that that is an accurate number as to what we will be able to collect under this program. My second concern is the significant decrease in the funds that we can collect, but no or very minimal change in the administration costs. So the program has now become a lot more expensive to administer for a lower return. So I have some questions about the ROI as far as this budget goes. Having said that, I am not in favor of reverting to a $10.3 million budget for the Livability Tax Program. So I will wait to hear from my fellow councillors. I'm still deciding as to how I'm going to vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham?
Your Worship, am I able to ask for a 5-minute break at this point in time?
We are mid-debate.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, if you need to think about it, I would really ask you just to be thinking about it yourself. We'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, sir.
Where's the signal that we are back? Okay, we are back. Before taking our 5-minute break, there's a motion on the table to accept to amend the livability budget for 2026 and the business plans for 2027 and 2028 as recommended by administration. Councillor Graham, you wish to speak to that motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that a lot. And I also appreciate the break we just took. That was helpful. Our community has significant needs. And we have done a lot to move this forward. A $4.4 million budget, unfortunately for me, does not move the needle forward in the ways that we are capable of. These tax rates are fair. And yeah, I won't be able to support this at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ma?
Thank you for your worship, and pretty much where my head is at the moment is the need of the community is still unchanged, and I believe Councillor Marin brings up an interesting point about ROI with respect to administration costs. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion before I call the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of this motion? All those opposed? The motion is carried with Councillors Faubert, Graham, and Ma opposed. So that being the case, as I set forth originally, we now move to the next two motions as they are written. Just going to pull them up here. So I will now move that council cancel the following currently approved 2026 capital projects with livability reserve funding identified and amend the capital plan for 2027 through 2031 as presented. And those two projects are Capital Project 7465, YWCA Mustache Lands Project for 2026, and Capital Project 7486 for Palliser Pedestrian Crossing Design. This motion naturally falls from the decision that was just made based on the budget that was associated with it. It does not mean that we're not proceeding with these projects. It means that the timing for them would be different if funded by the Livability Reserve as set forth. Of course, come this fall, we will be taking a look at again, as we do every 2 years, at our capital plans, at our operating budgets, at our capital budget, and there will be an opportunity to speak to them again. I, for one, am very interested in having the pedestrian crossing design done sooner than in that plan, so I will be wanting to have a conversation at that time about potentially alternative forms of funding or moving things around. We'll also have better information at that time, and we can assess whether some of these projects can go back in at an earlier rate, or if we find alternatives for them in the interim. Looking to see if anyone else would like to speak to the motion. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser. I'm going to be supporting the next two motions as it is important moving forward with the budgets that they align with the council direction. I want to echo some of the comments around Capital Project 7486, the Palliser Pedestrian Crossing Design. And I know that within the context of this report, it looks like that is moved out to 2030, but this council has just approved a strategic plan, and we will be moving into our budget deliberations in the fall and winter, and that is a very the most important time for a new council because it is a 4-year budget process, and we will be able to discuss that pedestrian bridge more appropriately at that time than for me to put a motion forward today to try and change where it is in the capital plan now. And so I want to make sure that we're speaking to that and the community is aware that we're not pushing it out, we're pushing the discussion to the fall. So, but we have to amend our capital plan to align with the changes that were just voted on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be voting in support of this motion and also echoing what you said, Mayor Krauser, and what you said, Councillor Faubert, regarding CAP 7486. Pushing this out to 2030 is far too long. We've been kicking the can down the road for this Palliser pedestrian crossing for too long. And we're at the point now where we are, with 100 Palliser coming on stream, with the Mustache Lands and the YWCA project, that area will probably be one of the most dense, if not the most dense area of Canmore in the coming years here. And, the traffic issues that could come with that if we don't have the proper infrastructure in place to allow for pedestrian access and for alternate forms of transportation, I think we will be heading into a big problem. So again, I will, for the same reasons that both of you have already spoken to, I'll be supporting this motion and will be very excited to be discussing ways to put this back on the capital plan sooner when we get to that point in the budget cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser. I will also be supporting the next two motions. Again, knowing that we have an opportunity to discuss these projects sooner rather than later, and that it will be part of our larger budget deliberations, because I do think that they warrant more discussion than just pushing them off as the proposed budget is in front of us. So supporting, but again, knowing that we will revisit those soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move the council amend the funding for capital project 7481 Stoneworks Creek mitigation to replace $350,000 in funding from the Livability Reserve with funding from the General Capital Reserve. In speaking in support of this motion, there's a lot of grant funding that is applied to this project, and we need to make sure that it keeps going. It also then frees up a lot of land for development that is currently on hold until said mitigations are complete. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? I know some of you already have in indicating that you support it already. Anyone else? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone.